Here are some tips and techniques for taking effective notes in class and how to review those notes when it's time for an exam. Let's start with how not to take notes. Copy down everything on the professor's PowerPoint slide word for word as fast as you can, and if the prof changes a slide, raise your hand and say, "Can you please go back one slide because I didn't get all of that down in my notebook," where I won't look at it again until a few hours before the exam, and I will rely on my memory for what it all means. If you were trying to write all of that down in class before the slide changed, you probably wouldn't have gotten all of it down. And even if you had, you probably wouldn't have had time to mentally process what it all means. So those notes wouldn't have been very useful to you. Let me give you some tips for taking notes in a more useful way that will make them more meaningful to you later on. So, how do you take good notes in class? Well, taking good notes in class actually starts before class with reading any assignments carefully beforehand and taking some notes on the reading in your own words, highlighting things, writing keywords in the margins, and getting an overall understanding of that reading before you come into the classroom. Write down any questions that you have or any terms that need clarification before class. Make yourself an outline or list of the topics in the chapter so you'll have kind of a roadmap for yourself even before the lecture begins. Now, in lecture, I recommend that you always write things down in your own words. Copying what the professor has written on the PowerPoint will not be as useful to you as putting that in your own words. And if you're in my class, on my PowerPoints, those are really just my speaking notes as the teacher. I just put down some keywords and phrases that will help me remember what I want to tell you. So if you're just writing down those words and phrases, you're not going to make the same connection with them as you would if you took notes in your own words. I recommend that you always write down an example to go along with your notes. In class, I usually tell a little story or anecdote about the term we're discussing. So I give you examples. It's useful to write those down and also to write down an example from your own life in your own words. That will help you make connections later when you're reviewing your notes. Review your notes immediately after class to flesh out anything that maybe you didn't get down in detail in the moment. And make note of any questions you might have for next time we meet, if there was anything that remained unclear to you at the end of the lecture. Let's look at some things you can do before the exam in order to review carefully. First of all, review your book. Flip back through the chapters that are going to be covered on the exam. Refamiliarize yourself with that material. Look at the terms that are in bold. Look at the things that you underlined and highlighted before and the notes that you wrote in the margins before, just to reorient yourself. Review your notes. Read through all of your class notes. Note the connections between your class notes and the chapter material, and also note what you have in your class notes that was not in the chapter, because sometimes the professor will cover things in class that are not in the book. Focus on both definitions and examples. It's not enough to just be able to define all the terms in the chapter. That's foundational for really understanding those terms. But think of an example of each one where you would apply that in your life. And if you're in the habit of thinking of examples, that will serve you well if you find an application question on an exam. An application question might tell you a little story and then ask you, which course term does this illustrate? And if you're used to thinking up examples and making those connections, you'll have an easier time with that kind of exam question. And note similarities and differences between course terms and course vocabulary, similarities and differences between the theories that we might discuss, because some of them sound similar or they might have names that kind of sound the same, but they have different characteristics. So for those, make sure you understand which is which and that you can identify the different ones. Finally, remember that they're your notes, so write down the things that will help you. You're not being graded on this. They don't have to make sense to anybody else. As long as they make sense to you when it comes time to review for an exam, then you will have taken good and effective notes. Best of luck, everyone.